Jalen woke before sunrise, the soft glow of his phone lighting up his room as he reviewed his application one last time. He ran his fingertip over the words he had crafted, honest and unflinching reflections on inequality. Hope threaded through every sentence. His mother's gentle breathing came from the next room, where she sat late nights sewing extra shifts into her hospital scrubs. His little sister still slept soundly against the steady hum of the fan. Downstairs, the worn hardwood floorboards creaked under Jalen's feet as he made his way into the kitchen, careful not to wake his grandmother, whose stories of the civil rights movement filled their evenings with both pride and pain. Over pancakes and coffee, Jalen described to his father, who'd traded his dreams of law school for a factory job, the young politicians he admired on YouTube, the ones whose voices rang out on city council floors and inspired protests across the nation. His father nodded, pressing a gentle hand to Jalen's shoulder, and told him that every change began with someone brave enough to speak. At school, teachers whispered that Jalen's ideas were advanced for someone his age. He carried their praise like a shield, but also like a promise. This wouldn't be another talent buried beneath routine. That afternoon, the small town of Willow Springs seemed to buzz with an unusual energy. Posters for the upcoming county fair fluttered in the breeze, and children laughed as they chased stray leaves across the courtyard. Jalen found a quiet corner in the library, sunlight pooling on the page as he added statistics about local school funding disparities, quotes from elders in the community, and personal anecdotes from his own experiences of being overlooked. With each sentence, he painted a portrait of a city where voices like his were rarely heard at the table. Until now, when the last line of his cover letter shimmered on the screen, "I will bring integrity, empathy, and unwavering dedication to every discussion." Jalen took a deep breath and clicked submit. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of possibility. He imagined walking through the doors of City Hall in a few weeks, standing before the mayor's youth council and speaking the truths he had lived. In that moment, as dusk settled over the quiet town, Jalen felt something shift inside him. This was no longer just a dream. It was the first step toward making real change. Jalen stared at the screen of his laptop until the words blurred into an accusatory haze. "We regret to inform you." His breath caught, and for a moment he couldn't move. It was as if the room itself had frozen, his desk lamp casting a solitary cone of light on the rejection letter that still glowed innocuously in black and white. He clicked open the attached PDF, hoping against hope that there had been a mistake. Instead, he found a list of 12 names, 12 slots on the youth council, and every single one of them was unmistakably white. A tight knot of anger and disbelief formed in his chest. He closed his eyes and saw the bright faces of his friends at school, the teachers who had praised his ideas, his mother working nights at the hospital to keep food on their table. He remembered the stories his grandmother told about injustice in the streets of cities far bigger than Willow Springs. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him to feel so unmoored in the place he called home. He went to school that morning, carrying the weight of the letter in his backpack like a brick. In homeroom, he tried to concentrate on the calculus problems scrawled across the board, but all he could think about was the stark contrast between his life and the opportunities he saw slipping away. During lunch, he sat alone at the edge of the cafeteria, tracing faint cracks in the wooden table with his finger. He watched the other students laugh and plan weekend parties, and he wondered, did they even notice him? Halfway through the afternoon, his friend Mia slid into the seat across from him. She wore concern like a second skin. "I saw your email," she said quietly, nodding toward his closed laptop. "I'm sorry, Jay, they said you'd be too radical." It sounded absurd even as she spoke it. Too radical to fight for fairness, too outspoken to sit at the table where decisions were made. The bitterness in his throat burned. That evening, he wandered the empty streets near his house, the sun slipping behind the rooftops. His headphones lay silent around his neck. He couldn't bear music tonight. Every step felt heavy, filled with questions. Why was his voice considered dangerous? What did fairness look like if not a seat at the council? He remembered his father's words. Change doesn't come easy. But he had never expected resistance would come so close to home. At the kitchen table, his mother pressed a cup of cocoa into his hands. Walk with me, she said, nodding toward the old photo album. Together they flipped through pictures of his grandparents marching on Selma, of local protests from decades past. Each photograph whispered that courage was a family heirloom, passed from one generation to the next. His mother's eyes were soft but fierce as she closed the album. Your voice matters, she said. You carry the weight of all those who came before. Later that night, Jalen opened a blank document on his laptop and began to type. Not an application, but a speech. Every sentence pulsed with the hurt of exclusion and the promise of possibility. He would not let a letter define his worth. He would not accept that justice could only be spoken in voices that looked like the status quo. As he wrote, the anger in his chest transformed into determination. He would make them hear him, one way or another. When the clock on his wall ticked past midnight, he saved the file under a new name. My Voice, My Right. And for the first time since the rejection arrived, he felt something surge through him stronger than disappointment. Hope. Jalen sat cross-legged on the edge of his bed, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating the determination in his eyes. He rehearsed his words one last time, voice wavering with a mix of nerves and conviction. He wanted to speak from the heart, raw and unfiltered. So he grabbed his phone and positioned it against a stack of textbooks. Behind him, the worn poster of Martin Luther King Jr. served as both inspiration and witness. Clearing his throat, he began to speak, recounting the sting of rejection, the ache of being silenced, and the unshakable belief that every teenager, no matter the color of their skin, deserved a seat at the table. His voice gained strength as he went on. He quoted statistics about graduation rates and funding gaps. But he also told personal stories. The time a teacher overlooked his raised hand. The moment a classmate joked that he was out of place at a discussion on city budgets. He didn't just accuse. He invited his neighbors to imagine life through his eyes, to feel the frustration of watching decisions made for you instead of by you. I am not a radical, he said, eyes fierce. I am a son of this city, and your counsel belongs to all of us. When he finished, he let the silence hang for a heartbeat before whispering, "Thank you for listening," and tapped the record button again to stop. He watched the video back, heart pounding, and pressed upload without a second thought. Within minutes, his phone buzzed. A notification, one like, then another, and another. He watched the counter climb by the dozens as classmates on Instagram began to share with captions like, "Finally, someone says it," and "Stand with Jalen." By evening, the video had blown past 10,000 views. Comments poured in, some praising his courage, others questioning his tone, but mostly messages of solidarity. Local community groups shared the link, urging residents to listen to our youth. A neighborhood Facebook page dedicated to Willow Springs politics featured his speech as must-see video of the week, and within hours, local bloggers were dissecting his points and calling for a response from City Hall. Jalen's phone buzzed again with a message from the school newspaper's editor. They wanted to interview him for a feature story. His mother peeked into his room and, seeing the excitement on his face, embraced him, tears shining. "You did it," she whispered. "You made them stop and listen." Across town, the mayor's chief of staff watched the video and frowned. The clip had reached the mayor's own newsfeed, and for the first time, the administration felt the heat of public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Jalen lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling, heart still racing. He knew this was only the beginning. His speech had become a spark, and now it was up to the city to decide whether it would ignite real change or be extinguished by the same old politics. Jalen closed his eyes with a quiet smile, ready for whatever came next. The morning air at Willow Springs felt electric, as if the town itself had been jolted awake. Word of Jalen's video had spread like wildfire. By sunrise, flyers calling for a peaceful gathering at City Hall were plastered on lampposts and bulletin boards. School buses rolled by with students craning their necks to snap pictures of the posters. Parents dropped their kids off with hushed conversations about what's happening in town. And local cafes brewed extra pots of coffee for the steady stream of early patrons who hovered over their phones, refreshing news pages. Jalen arrived at the courthouse lawn just after 8, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans, heart thundering in his chest. He saw familiar faces, friends from school, teammates from the basketball court, as well as people he'd never met. Teachers carrying signs scrawled with statistics, church groups linking arms, small business owners in work boots lifting banners that read, "Every voice matters," and "Listen before you decide." There was a hum of chatter, but underneath it all was a growing cadence of anticipation, like a heartbeat swelling toward a steady drum. When the clock struck 9, someone started a chant, "We are here. We will not yield." It rippled through the crowd, and soon Jalen found himself swept up in the rhythm. He glanced at Mia beside him. Her eyes shone bright with purpose, and felt a surge of pride. Across the lawn, uniformed officers stood in formation, watching without interference. Everyone had agreed. This was to be a demonstration of unity, not division. Inside the stately facade of City Hall, the mood was entirely different. The mayor's chief of staff paced the polished floors, phone pressed to his ear, repeating, "They're out there now! Thousands! This is serious!" In the conference room, the mayor himself, white-haired and usually unflappable, leaned over the table, scanning the news feed on his tablet. His knuckles whitened against the bronze frame as live streams showed the crowd growing by the minute. He tapped at the screen, pausing on Jalen's face as he stood on a makeshift platform, his small figure haloed by morning light. Back on the lawn, Jalen took a deep breath and raised his voice. "We came here to be heard. We came here to make change." The crowd responded in full voice, their chants echoing off the stone walls. Someone handed him a megaphone, its crackle magnifying every word. He didn't accuse or scold. He spoke of hope, of dreams deferred and promises unkept. He painted a future where decisions were made together, voices were lifted equally, and every teenager in Willow Springs felt a sense of belonging. As he spoke, a silence fell over part of the crowd, an almost reverent pause that underscored the gravity of his words. Then applause broke out, not the polite clapping of a formal event, but the spontaneous roar of a community refusing to be ignored. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, and somewhere among the throng, local reporters scribbled furiously. By mid-morning, the mayor emerged on the balcony, flanked by advisors. He raised a hand to quiet the murmurs. Jalen watched, chest tight, as the mayor's face flickered through a dozen emotions: surprise, defensiveness, uncertainty. When the mayor finally spoke, his voice was measured. "I understand your concerns," he said, "and I am deeply sorry for any hurt caused." Yet even through that apology, Jalen could sense the undercurrent of caution. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. In that charged moment, Jalen realized the real work was only beginning. The city had awakened, but change would require more than words. He looked around at the faces lit by sunlight and conviction and felt a steely resolve settle into him. Together, they would demand action, and they would not leave until real reform had taken root. The next morning, the county newspaper's front page carried a headline so sharp it felt like a knife. Youth Council's color line. Exclusive investigation reveals 5 years of exclusion. Jalen sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. His eyes scanned each paragraph as if searching for a lie, but there was none. Reporter Paige Turner had gone deep into dusty filing cabinets at City Hall, uncovering meeting minutes that quietly noted, "Keep applicant pool homogeneous," and emails between council members, discussing how to vet out potentially troublesome voices. That afternoon, a local TV crew arrived on his street. Cameras rolled as Jalen stepped outside, the newspaper clutched in his hand. Page introduced a former council aide, John Simmons, who spoke with a tremor in his voice about the pressure he'd felt to steer clear of applicants like Jalen. Simmons described late-night calls from advisors who warned him that a black teenager with strong opinions could upset the balance of a traditionally white council. As the aide spoke, Jalen felt anger and vindication swirl together, a painful proof that his rejection was never about merit. By evening, social media lit up with screenshots of internal memos showing the words "No radical activists" scrawled in margin notes. Neighbors who had once dismissed his video as teenage bravado now sent him messages of apology and solidarity. A pastor from the local black church posted a sermon clip online, quoting scripture alongside footage of Simmons's confession. "Truth," he said, "must guide our leaders, not fear." That clip, more than anything, galvanized a wider audience. Townsfolk from surrounding counties began demanding their own councils be audited. In City Hall, the walls, once proud of their neutrality, felt brittle. Council members gathered behind closed doors, voices low but urgent, as emails continued to surface. One memo, signed by 3 long-serving members, admitted plainly that true diversity is inconvenient. The admission rippled through the evening news like an electric shock. Anchors spoke of betrayal, of promises broken. Pundits called it the racial covert operations of local government. Jalen watched it all unfold from his living room, the glow of the television reflecting in his eyes. He saw friends and strangers unite in outrage, heard his own name repeated on air as both a victim and a catalyst. Despite the bitter taste of betrayal, he felt a fierce pride. His voice had compelled the city to confront its hidden biases, to uncover the rot beneath polite veneers. Late that night, he received an unexpected text from Simmons. "Thank you, you did it." Jalen stared at the message long after his phone's screen had dimmed. He understood then that the fight had shifted, from seeking a seat at the table to demanding the table itself be rebuilt. And as he closed his eyes, he pictured a future council chamber where every voice, regardless of color or creed, would be welcomed without apology. A crisp spring morning brought an unusual calm to City Hall, as though the walls themselves were bracing for change. Overnight, the mayor had issued a brief but unmistakable press release dissolving the existing youth council and announcing a complete overhaul of its selection process. Journalists crowded the marble steps, cameras swiveling toward Jalen as he emerged from the throng, clutching a single sheet of paper stamped with the city seal. Hands trembling, he read the new guidelines: open applications, blind review panels, mandatory representation from every neighborhood, and clear quotas to ensure voices of color would no longer be sidelined. Inside the Grand Council chamber, varnished oak benches gleamed under the glare of overhead lights. A small group of city officials, community leaders, and an assortment of nervous teenagers gathered in a semicircle around the mayor's table. Jalen sat near the front, heart pounding as the mayor spoke of restoring trust and building a council that truly reflects Willow Springs. When it came time to unveil the first round of new members, Jalen felt 1,000 questions and hopes swirl together. He watched as names were read. Several were his friends, some he barely knew, all of them young people of different backgrounds who now had permission to dream of influence. That afternoon, Jalen stayed behind while the others dispersed, the room suddenly too quiet. He approached the mayor's side and found himself offering suggestions. Words about youth-led town halls, community listening sessions in church basements and rec centers, and a monthly televised debate where council members would be accountable on live air. To his surprise, the mayor nodded thoughtfully and invited him to co-author the council's charter and moderate the first televised forum. In that moment, the role of outsider shifted. Jalen was no longer demanding entry. He was shaping the institution itself. In the weeks that followed, Jalen and a team of new council members convened late into the evenings in a small conference room on the second floor. They argued over wording: inclusive, equitable, accessible, drafting bylaws that would prevent future secrecy. Jalen lobbied for a clause requiring an annual public report on demographic participation and decision outcomes. When one white member balked at the mandatory language, Jalen gently reminded her that true inclusivity could never be optional. Their debates sometimes grew heated, voices raised in passionate defense of ideals they had long been denied. A few nights later, Jalen stood before a bank of studio lights in the television station downtown. Flanked by his fellow council members, he introduced the new segment, Willow Speaks, a live broadcast where teenagers could call in, ask questions, and propose policies. His voice was steady as he welcomed the audience, acknowledging the city's past failures before promising a new chapter of transparency. Behind the scenes, producers whispered about ratings and buzz, but Jalen saw only the rows of cameras as windows into every home in Willow Springs. When the broadcast went live, the first caller was a young Latina student who asked how the council would improve public transportation to her neighborhood. The second was a black teen who wanted to expand funding for the arts. With each question, Jalen felt the weight of responsibility and the thrill of possibility. He realized that reform was more than policy documents and press releases. It was the steady, unbroken hum of conversation between leaders and the young people they served. As Willow Speaks rolled on, Jalen understood that this council was no longer an exclusive club. It was a bridge, built by the very voices it existed to amplify. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the newly renovated City Hall chamber, illuminating the rows of proud faces gathered for the annual Youth Council celebration. At the front of the room, Jalen stood tall behind the polished podium, his shoulders squared in the same quiet confidence that had carried him from that first shaky speech in his bedroom to this moment of triumph. Around him sat council members of every background. Maria, whose family had immigrated from El Salvador and who'd championed bilingual after-school programs. Lee, whose passion for environmental justice had won green grants for local parks. Aaron, the tech-minded kid who built the council's first virtual town hall platform. And Naomi, whose enthusiasm for arts funding had filled community centers with painting workshops and dance classes. Jalen glanced out at the audience, catching sight of his grandmother in the front row, her eyes glistening with pride. His mother, her hands folded over his little sisters, and scattered among them dozens of teenagers he had never met before, clutching clipboards and smartphones, eager to share the next big idea. He remembered the months of drafting bylaws, of late-night debates over representation clauses and budget lines, of dozens of practice speeches until every word felt like an extension of his own heartbeat. All of it had led here, a council that no longer whispered about inclusion but lived it. He cleared his throat and the room fell silent. When I first walked through these doors, he began, voice resonant, I was told my ideas were too radical, that my voice didn't belong here. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Jalen let a small smile surface. Today, I stand before you not as someone pushing past a barrier, but as someone who helped tear it down. He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle. Behind him, screens lit up with the logo of the council's newest initiative, One Voice. One Voice is more than a name, he explained, warming to his theme. It is a promise that every young person's idea, no matter their zip code, their background, or the color of their skin, will be heard, debated, and if worthy, brought to life. He clicked a remote, and the screen shifted to show a vibrant website interface, where students could post proposals, gather digital signatures, and sign up to lead volunteer committees. From free tutoring programs in underfunded schools to solar-powered bus stops in our oldest neighborhoods, One Voice puts the power of policy directly in your hands. A round of applause rose as Jalen stepped away from the podium and joined his fellow council members. Together, they unveiled a bronze plaque in the chamber foyer bearing the names of every young person who'd served since the council's rebirth. As cameras flashed and the applause continued, Jalen felt a gentle tug at his sleeve. Turning, he saw a shy freshman holding a crumpled sheet of notebook paper. The girl's voice trembled as she asked how she could submit her idea for a community garden in her part of town. Jalen knelt beside her, took her hand, and said, "Right here, one voice at a time." Later, when the celebration wound down and the lights dimmed, Jalen lingered in the empty chamber. He traced his fingers over the smooth surface of the podium, recalling every moment of doubt, every setback, and every small victory that had led to this quiet triumph. He whispered into the silence, "If you ever think your voice doesn't matter, remember today, and know that I am living proof of the power one teenager can hold." And as he walked out into the warm afternoon sun, he carried with him not just the legacy of change, but the promise of tomorrow's voices rising behind him.